I am Anuli Akanegbu, and you are listening to the Black in Real Life Podcast.
You're golden, you're so golden. What you got, you're the golden child. I see forever between you and me, forever between us.
Our social interactions as humans require a fair share of performance. This is the part where that famous line from Shakespeare's comedy, As You Like It, is usually quoted. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. Whether you are an influencer or not, your interactions require that you play, that you perform. Today's guest, Saleam Singleton, says that performance self-care online is one of the ways that he honors himself. Saleam Singleton is a Brooklyn-based men's skincare and beauty advocate and content creator. He's currently a contributing writer for Birdie.com and represents as part of their Birdie Boy franchise. A native of Philadelphia, Saleam grew up expressing himself through acts of beauty and personal style. He also discovered his interest in media early on and has since combined his passions. His goal is to contribute to the inclusion of Black men's voices in the beauty industry. Remember, at the end of each interview, I will come back to share a few key takeaways that stood out to me from our conversation. These takeaways will be supplemented with research from both academic and non-academic sources to add further context to subjects that were brought up in the interview portion. For every episode, I will include citations to reference materials I mention, as well as some additional background reading for you on the Black in Real Life website. Visit www.blkirl.com to nerd out. Okay, now without further ado, let's get into my conversation with men's skincare and beauty advocate and content creator Saleam Singleton, also known as the Method Male. I actually read an article that you wrote for Birdie about how beauty became your form of self-expression. So I wanted to start by asking you about some of the things in that article because I do think that they are important in grounding our conversation. So one of the things that struck out to me is how you wrote about your first trip to the dermatologist when you were in high school. And that was a time when you were dealing with skin issues as, teens do. I definitely did. And one thing that struck me was your retelling of the experience. You had to lean on skincare advice from magazines like 17, which are predominantly catered to girls and women. And you wrote, although the magazines were mostly geared towards girls, I was somehow able to see myself within that aspirational space. So my question for you after that preamble is, as someone who is now known as the Method Male, how are you able to see yourself in an aspirational space that may not have been made for you?
How am I now?
Well, how were you back then able to see
Okay.
yourself?
Well, I think the first thing is a lot of what that piece was about was essentially survival tactics for a young kid growing up in poverty who was being, it was being projected upon me, what my lifestyle may have been like, whether the calling you gay or calling you feminine thing. So it's essentially for me about my identity. So I think I've always used my imagination to survive. And I when I saw that world and I saw things that I wanted to be a part of, like being young and on TV and not in the projects and not poor and not bullied. I was able to see myself in a quite literal sense. And the way that it connects to now is that when I didn't see any young Black guys, I saw young Black guys. And that's the only reason I was able to pursue a lot of the different things that I have in my life, like college or, going into public relations, even at one point pursuing music in a certain genre that wasn't predominantly Black. So I think for me, it was about having a really strong will and a really strong imagination. And I knew that what I saw in the mirror wasn't so much about acne as it was about really me wanting to feel attractive and me wanting to feel beautiful at a really young age. And I think what I saw that was geared towards women, I refused to deny myself to be a part of it. So I think I just kind of interjected. Any money that I made, like I said in the article, I would walk to the Path Market maybe 2 miles away from my house and buy Clearasil, Noxzema, you name it. And I don't know how at that age I was able to select those things for therapy or for self-identification. But if I had to simplify it, I would say it was my will and my imagination and how I used that to survive where I was at that time, which was a place I didn't want to be. And I also didn't want to be teased. And I also didn't want to consider myself to be ugly or unattractive. And skincare was something tangible that I could purchase that at the time was marketed to me in a way that made me feel everything would be better. And I had to be a part of that.
And you also, in that article, you went on to write that, like, over time, your commitment to skincare became a defining characteristic for you. So could you talk about that? Like, what does the skincare and the rituals involved in it mean to you as a person?
Very, very early, I think when I was that kid on the front step with the mint julep mask on, I think eventually, like, my male friends, maybe not in a scale that they would now, but I would get little questions. And it's a funny story. I was selling like wave kits in first grade. Like,
What?
I always tell this story. I don't know why I'm not like a big entrepreneur. I used to sell wave kits. So I think in retrospect, I've always in some way, shape, or form identified with that, what we now know as the beauty world. So I think people started to immediately associate me with how much I love skincare products, how much I love media. What it means to me now, maintenance and self-care. Although I use beauty as the platform, I like to look at what I'm doing on a personal level as what I'm performing is the physical manifestation of all of the self-work that I've done in my adult life. And I think my performance of the maintenance of my body is me honoring myself. And it's something that essentially what the method male is about. The method itself is about the steps that you take to become the fully realized man that you want to be, which for me was the root of this idea. Going to the therapist and just really talking about, I want to be, and I would leave and realize like, oh, let me start to emulate these habits that I would go and tell my therapist I wanted to have. Then I would go back in and say, oh, hey, I went and bought that camera. Oh, hey, I went and started to journal. And the method comes from method acting. And it's this idea that an actor takes on a character and for a certain period of time, he never takes it off. He becomes that character. So self-care for me and how it pertains to the method male on a personal level is about me. It's a ritual that I use to become as close an idea of the man that I would love to be as possible, if that makes any sense at all.
That's actually really interesting, especially the part where you mentioned method acting, because now I'm wondering, where does Saleam start and method male begin? Like, is it the same person or are there differences?
Really interesting question. Actually, no. There's no one. The secret is there is no one method male, and in the future, I would love for the method male to be a brand and not just something that's applied to me. But right now, it is an extension of who I am. On social media, and even throughout the years, there are so many parts of my life and myself that I haven't shared, that I don't share. On my Instagram page, there are no mentions of me going to restaurants or going on a date or people that I hang out with. So I do like to think that the method male is, it's not a character, but I like to, when I step into the studio or the studio mindset, when that camera is on, my job is to communicate my journey through self-care and reflect that back to the people that are watching. And so I like to leave as much Saleam out of it. So it's a part of me, but it's not the wholeness of me. Saleam is a lot more complex, a lot darker, a lot more cynical, a lot more cerebral and deliberate in a lot of things, overthinking. Whereas the method male, I like to keep as much of that dialogue out of the equation and just get straight to the performance of self-care.
And how did you go about establishing those boundaries for yourself when you started producing content online?
It comes very natural to me. I'm a Gemini, and I think it's a lot of cliche things to be said, but I think creative Geminis tend to be very deliberate in our mutability, like it's code switching. And I know it's really weird, like the affect that I have on camera by myself in my apartment versus me talking to you now or even with a friend. So I don't know if it's so much something that I have to think about. I know that, like there are tangible things like I'm not going to be doing too much cussing. I'm not going to be using no N words. I'm not going to be talking about my personal dating life or drama. I've recently decided not to complain about brands at all because I now realize I can't do that. So it's weird. The method male space is almost sterile compared to if Saleam had an Instagram page.
And you did that on purpose.
Yeah, I do it on
Yeah.
purpose. Absolutely. This was when I started, it hit me in 2014, literally. Well, not literally, but what had hit me is that this was my purpose. I was in this apartment, I was standing right over there, and I remember I was coming up with the idea for the Method Mail, and when the name was finalized, and it was this rush, and I had this vision, and it was not plain words, but what I felt it was telling me, lean into this. Like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. I spent so many years not seeing Black men on YouTube, not being able to relate to the Black men I saw on YouTube, not being able to use products that were being used in this new gold mine of content. So on one hand, I knew that I wanted to make content, but on another, I felt like this could be my career. But it wasn't until 2017 when I decided to use Instagram that I became more consistent. Once I decided to use my page to create my videos, from that day forward, which may have been November 2017, I completely stopped communicating as Saleam. Although I still have years worth of posts left down there, a lot of that stuff, I was doing like a lot of like really, cryptic stuff, but not in a negative way. That's just my form of art. I knew, now I'm getting to what you're asking. I knew that when I started this, that my goal, I felt very strongly in 2017, if I start doing this, this could be my job. And I had all of these goals, the cliche stuff like, oh, I have my own products, I'll do all of these collaborations. I would have never known that I would have, become a writer or a copywriter or consult brands. But I knew that I wanted what I was doing on my page from 2017 on to be about business. And I knew that I was building a brand.
I definitely want to get more into the career part, but before that, I'm curious, when your Instagram page, before it was Saleam and now it's the Method Mail, so you didn't create a new page, you just like added to the one you already had that was personal, but now you went to like a more like professional persona.
Yeah.
How did that feel? Like you're like evolving into a new person.
I've done it a lot. I came to New York as one guy nobody called me Saleam until maybe 2014 or 15. When I came to New York and started to hang out in New York 05, 06, blah, 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 I was a whole other in the Afropunk scene, expressing myself through music. So I say that to say I had already reinvented myself back into Saleam for the first time in New York once I decided to stop pursuing that form of expression. I went back into PR and totally had to flip my mind all over again from artist life and all that comes with that. So shifting into the Method Mail, one, I had a lot of preparation because I started in 2014 and was dabbling. And then two, this is what I want. So I ordered all of this stuff. You know what I mean? Like I've written this stuff down. I came up with the name The Method Mail. I came up with this kind of like tagline, creating a lifestyle for the man in progress. I knew that I wanted to be on a GQ level of being trusted by men for information, but I had no idea how I was going to get there. The only thing that I can tell you for sure is that between 2017 and now, the only thing I didn't do was stop, because I had plenty of times where I'm like, what am I doing? Nobody's watching these videos. I wasn't doing it to make money, but I have to go make money, so I can't be home. Going through a lot of craziness, a lot of self-doubt, feeling invisible, using brands and them not even acknowledging that I was using their stuff, not asking for emails, like it. I was going through that for a long time, but I kept going because I knew, I call it like it's just like the craziness that comes along with being an artist. You have to ride that wave of doubt and feeling like what you're doing makes absolutely no sense. And I think the only reason that I stuck through all of that is because I knew that I wanted this to be my career, and I knew I wanted to build something bigger than myself out of this.
So what is that impact that you want to make?
I would like to contribute to the normalization of Black men's inclusion into the conversation of beauty, particularly. It's still such a loaded topic, the word beauty, gender expression, the taboo behind that, especially now with so much conversation going on everywhere. I don't profess, nor do I seek to become an expert or a guru. I would like to be able to be a voice in this conversation within all of the there's so many different levels within this larger conversation of men and self-care and men and beauty. If we just talk about self-care, we have to leave products aside and start talking about mental health, which is extremely important. Although it's often discussed and almost feels over discussed now, it's still something that's very new. And I find as a Black man and as a queer Black man that my brothers are hurting, and we need love. We need love from each other. And I found that performing beauty on Instagram has brought me closer to so many different men. Rappers, I'm talking about rappers who you go to their page and there's weed everywhere, contacting me, telling me their most intimate secrets about how they feel about themselves. And that is why I started this. And if there's any impact at all, it would be possibly, it would be my, if it's not big, my contribution to developing that space as well. My goals are to have a show. You know, I'd like to be, you know, a Martha Stewart type of guy. I would like to go into the skincare and the beauty, of course, but again, we have to broaden that conversation. There's the lifestyle wellness element, mental health, and I have my own experiences within those things and also a lot to say. So I'd like to also create, and when I say brand, I don't mean like a lot of Instagram followers. I like for men, when they think about these things, to go to my website or to go to my Instagram or to think about something that they learn from my platform or my show. And I like to do that for the rest of my life and have it shift as time, like when I'm in my 70s, I wonder what that conversation would be like. And I definitely want to be here for that.
The gender conversation is one, particularly in like the influencer marketing space. That is something that I'm particularly interested in as well. Because even in the like research for this podcast, it's hard to find men that actually acknowledge themselves in as an influencer or doing beauty or anything that you do. It's hard to find other men that like acknowledge that they do it. So one thing I want to talk about is like language, right? Like I even think about the phrase like male grooming and like how grooming in the aesthetic sense is associated with men, but why is it called male grooming and not male beauty? Whereas the activities, shaving, plucking, treason, are grooming rituals that both men and women do, but they're called beauty for women and grooming for men. Like what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so while I'm just going to say this, I could never you can't take, especially Black women, I can't exactly compare. I guess what I'm trying to say is while men really have a lot of growing up to do when it comes to our acknowledgement and care of women, we also, especially Black men, is very underlooked the different traumas, trigger words. The other day I was on on a FaceTime call and I showed a guy my Telfar bag and he said, "Why do you have a pocketbook?" And that wasn't offensive because it's like, okay, but that particular word is a word that may have been used between the 70s and the late 90s by grandmothers who were raising their children's children. And it was a word that was used to, quite frankly, to gender police the behavior of these little boys. And he had just in that moment projected that onto me. And it was a very specific word. I think that the marketing world and the product world likes to babysit men. And I think that companies think that men need to hear bro language. I think they need to hear a lot of really immature words. I'm trying not to name any names, but I see a lot of YouTube ads that make commercials that are almost mocking of men. It's almost like you think that a man, in order for him to digest a bar of soap, that he needs a guy with a beard in this corny commercial that has no production value. And that's their idea of how to get a man's attention. And these companies spend tens of thousands of dollars to do this. So that's what they believe. My issue with that, if I'm not escaping your question, is we need to normalize men's inclusion in the beauty space, which includes using words like beauty as it pertains to men, not being afraid to teach men that these acts, as you said, those are acts of beauty. And I know for myself, I make it, especially it's a very new thing, and that's what being a method male is about. I'm learning as I go, is using this in my everyday language with my friends, with intimate partners, so that they also, it becomes normal to them that I use the word beautiful as it pertains to myself. Of course, you'll get those, oh, you're cocky, but then that's an opportunity for me to say, actually, friend, no, that's not what it is at all. Let me tell you why, which is incredibly consistent with the work I do everywhere anyway, all this preaching. So I think where we are is a space where masculinity is being protected and this like really false construct that is being held on to. So a lot of this language is designed to make men feel like their masculinity is not being threatened. That's the problem. The solution, I find, is, or at least through what I've done, is just putting the content out there and the men will connect with it. As I stated earlier, the messages that I get from different types of guys, of different races, of different ages, it's not even about me. They just needed and wanted the information. So the more normal it becomes, the more you will see men. Now we'll have to sacrifice what we consider to be masculinity. And a lot of us will have to probably come to terms with the way men are going to perform in the future. If you look at Korea, for instance, there's a lot of what people consider to be femininity, but a lot of these men identify as heterosexual. The good thing is there's not a toxic stigma that these men might be gay. They just are. They date. They become stars or lawyers. I predict the future of America will be that way, but I think we're going to have to still learn to let go of the construct of gender, particularly masculinity. And I think the last thing I'll say about that is just, as a man, I feel so good about myself that I feel okay with the fact that I feel beautiful. And I've met so many men that are not gay that talk to me about beauty and use the word beauty, and we handshake, and it's just like such an amazing exchange. And that's what we need more of. The problem with masculinity and marketing is that it's actually pulling us farther apart. And my goal is to help that conversation as much as I can.
Do you believe that particularly beauty products should be marketed in a more gender fluid or genderless way? Because even on the women's side, there's definitely like a femininity that's performed to sell those products.
I think we from a marketing standpoint, we should do what comes natural. I don't like the idea that I don't like the idea of inclusivity and diversity, because we shouldn't even be asking for these things in the first place. That's the first problem. And so I think that we shouldn't be creating reactionary marketing that now speaks to men. I think that we should, when we talk about a product, we're talking about how a product works on the skin. And I think that language has to become more generalized, because we all have skin, right? Mm-hmm. And what I would like to see is I would like to see more dark-skinned women. I would like to see more dark-skinned women with tighter hair. I would like to see more dark-skinned men. I would like to see the spectrum of shade and also gender. But to answer your question, I don't know if we need to go and rewrite marketing copy. I think we may need to rely less on that people care about the gender language. Again, I mentioned men, but I also think that marketing thinks that we can't make decisions without gender markers, and we can.
And how do you feel, like speaking of gender markers, how do you feel about the labels influencer versus content creator? Do you find them to be gendered in any way? Is there a preferred label that you go by yourself?
I don't find them to be gendered. I prefer myself to be a content creator. It's what I'm doing when I'm doing it. When I'm recording, when I'm editing, I'm creating content. I don't feel comfortable considering myself to be an influencer, because I always say influencing what? People to buy stuff? I don't like that.
Isn't that
Even
what
if,
you do sometimes?
right, you just read right. But to say with a capital I that that's what I am doing, I don't know. That's a part of what I'm doing, and it is what I'm doing, but that's not what I am.
Got it.
I am content creating. I think it's a fair term. There are a lot of people out there that are killing it at influencing. I'm sure I'm influencing all the time, but I don't like being called an influencer.
I find that to be pretty common in general, but also across like gender lines. But aside from that, like, why do you think there's a stigma with the term influencer?
Because these are terminologies that some company makes up, or it's ours, and then they take it and regurgitate it to us and monetize it. So I don't think it's so much the term, it's what it's become. Influencer marketing, like, oh, it's this thing now, of this person who fulfills this function. And I think a lot of people might feel uncomfortable with that, and I think a lot of people might feel it's pretentious, and it's really just bashfulness for the most part. But again, it's like influencing what exactly? And I also think a lot of people feel if you're not talking to huge people, you'll find that most micro influencers don't really consider themselves to be influencers. I think it's just I think we're trying to hold on to our humbleness as long as we can before we have to just claim that we're influencing.
And you consider yourself in the micro influencer category since you just mentioned it?
Yes.
And do you produce content or do like influencing work full time?
Yeah, I do now. Yeah, well, yes. Instagram makes me some money now. Collaborations. Instagram has also allowed me to do consulting. I'm now writing. Not only am I writing for Birdie, I just got. I'm now contributing for AskMen.com, which speaking of some of these previous topics, that allows me to speak to in a completely different language than Birdie, to a completely different demographic of men and women. And now I'm copywriting, which once that floodgate is open, I can only imagine where that will go. But yes, Instagram allowed me to make content creating and influencing about beauty my job.
I realized recently, actually through another interview, that like, Instagram is about to turn 10 this year. And I was like, where did the time go? Tell me about yourself 10 years ago. Like, would you
Mm-hmm.
imagine that you would be doing what you're doing now?
Nope. 10 years ago, I thought that I was going to be a indie alt pop badass, making crazy videos and deep introspective dance pop music. I had no idea. I thought that maybe what I wanted was to have my own makeup collections, and I wanted to see, I don't want to use the word influence, but I wanted what I was doing with my art and my music. I remember always saying, I want to look out in the crowd and see men in makeup and drag queens and people in cosplay. So 10 years ago, I had a whole different idea of what I was going to be putting out and what I was going to be getting back. I definitely wanted to have some influence over men, Black men, being emotional and wearing makeup and being beautiful. But I had no idea I would be doing this.
Where does that desire come from? I wonder, like, there's a lot of people that just do their skincare routine and call it a day and move on about their business. Why put it online?
Well, for me, I've always wanted to be on the TV. I've always been a writer. I've always been a storyteller, and going back to that childhood space. And if I could even go back to that first question, I even saw myself on the actual TV in the ad. You know what I mean? So as I got older and the world changed, and I remember as soon as I got out of college, I had a bunch of friends. We all wanted to go into filmmaking. I remember having a conversation with them saying, we may not go to Hollywood right away, but let's just shoot our own pilot ourselves. And then look at what everybody does now. And I'm mentioning that because I knew that I was going to get my foot inside of the media somehow. I went to college for PR because there was no film, and PR made my ears stand up because I knew that was the media. And the compromise was, no, I wasn't the client and I wasn't the star, but I was definitely in that mix. Same with going into production. I love a set. I love coordinating projects. I love even today, the hecticness of all of this. I definitely wanted to be on the screen. So I think when you take the whole journey, for me, it's only natural to put myself in a space where I can be seen and heard, because it's what I've always wanted to do. And when you combine that with what I really do feel is this is my purpose, I feel even more compelled to perform it, which is what I call when I'm recording it. Because like when I'm doing it, I really am just doing my skincare, keeping it moving. But I put my heart into this content. And actually, right before I shot my first video, I was afraid to start. I was in a really dark place, and what I was afraid of was like that last shot where I smile and do the peace sign. Whatever that was going to be, I was like, I'm going to do whatever this video is, and when it's time for me to smile at the end, it's not going to be real. Well, I went and did that video, and that first smile and that first peace sign, I meant it, and I looked at myself, and I'm rubbing an ice cube on my face. Everybody's like, oh my God, this is dope. I got to try this. And it hit me again. It was like, oh, all this time, all I had to do was start. So I have to do this. I want to do this. And, I do it on camera because my goal is to turn this into a media platform. And hopefully in the future, there'll be other guys. And I'll just be like, like I said, like a Martha Stewart. It won't just be about me. I want the Method Mail to be a place, an idea, like the Hair Club for Men. I'm not just the president. I'm also a member. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I do it for the camera because I want to leave a lasting memory of everything I've ever worked hard for my entire life.
Now I'm thinking about your younger self selling wave kits and how earlier you had said, why didn't you become an entrepreneur? Do you feel like an entrepreneur?
Oh, absolutely. 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 Especially now. Everything's happening so fast. I even recently contacted a lawyer because it's so many things going on between, I got this Polish, I just got got one selected for a Polish choice program.
I saw that. Congratulations.
Thank you. And so speaking of getting what you asked for, in my application, I was like, well, I didn't know nothing about no money. They said paid. I'm like, cool. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew what I said. I was like, I want to show. I know I'm writing for Birdie and everything, but for me, that's not the extent of where I would like to hold my conversation. Now that I got it, it's almost, I have everything I need to make that next step to materialize what it is I want to show everyone. So I'm always losing it'll get to me. But what was the question? One more time, I almost lost it.
If you see yourself as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, yes, I do. And I find, thank you. I found that even if I didn't, I have to. That's what I was getting to. Because quite frankly, I know you wanted to talk real anyway. When money starts changing hands and invoices start getting paid, Uncle Sam gonna come calling. You can not claim that stuff all you want. He's going to see these transactions. It would behoove me to, form it. This won't be my first LLC, but to form an LLC and, take all of those steps. Obviously, all of those things that people think of, have, my LLC, my DBA. Also, I've always been planning to have a back-end creative agency. So that's something that I don't know when that's something that I could share or take a client on, but I've been working on so many things on the back end. So it's almost like everything came to me, and even if I didn't plan on being an entrepreneur, I have to protect my name now. I have to, everything from the URLs that I think of, immediately go and buy them. I have to make sure that, when I'm in a store, that I'm not rude to the person, because everybody in Bushwick knows everybody. So it's like I'm running a business now. Even before COVID, when a person would come up to me and be like, are you that dude? I'm not all like, oh, I'm smiling at them. I'm talking to them because this is a business. So yes, I do, whether I want to or not, have to see myself as an entrepreneur now more than ever. And I think every content creator, every young or young at heart Black person that is creating something tangible should start to look at themselves as entrepreneurs as soon as possible. Because eventually it's going to go there, and it's better to be ahead of yourself than the wave hit and you're like, I don't have any contracts. I have no clue what my rate is. So yes.
That was my conversation with Saleam Singleton, also known as the Method Male. I want to focus today's takeaways on the theme of performance, since it is an important aspect of Saleem's work as a content creator. Remember, for each episode, I will include citations to the reference materials I mention, as well as some additional background reading for you on the Black in Real Life website. Visit www.blkirl.com to nerd out. My own research positions influencing as a form of labor that involves particular notions about the presentation of self. I am inspired in part by the work of Erving Goffman, who viewed social interactions as a form of performance theater. Erving Goffman was a sociologist who pioneered the study of social interactions in everyday life. Following Goffman's lead in the context of this podcast, we can cast social media influencers as performers whose performances are guided by societal conventions and are informed by the expectations placed on their actions by others and themselves. Saleam is a great example of this. In our conversation, he talked about his desire to normalize the conversation about men and beauty. We also talked about how he creates boundaries between his online persona, the Method Male, and who he is offline. He describes Saleam as more complex and cerebral than the Method Male, whose actions are more informed, to an extent, by the expectations an influencer or content creator has to be a good partner to brands. For example, he shared that as a Method Male, he tries to refrain from cursing or publicly criticizing specific brands. This may differ from how other influencers or content creators maintain their online personalities, but these are choices that Saleam made for himself and his online performances. These choices are elements of what Goffman would refer to as Saleem's personal front. In the book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, Goffman defines personal front as the items of expressive equipment that we most intimately identify with the performer himself and that we naturally expect will follow the performer wherever he goes. Goffman explains that elements of personal front include clothing, speech patterns, facial expressions, bodily gestures, and the like. Even the peace sign that Saleam waves at the end of each of his videos on Instagram is an example of a personal front, which in our interview he admits to doing consistently in order to maintain brand recognition. I was particularly struck by the commentary that Saleam made about gender and the ways that brands reinforce traditional gender roles to sell products through the implementation of reductive tropes. Our conversation about gender and Saleem's goal to normalize the conversation about men and beauty makes me think about Judith Butler's essay about the ways that gender is constituted through performative acts. In this essay, Butler explains that gender is in no way a stable identity or locus of agency from which various acts proceed. Rather, gender is an identity that is tenuously constituted through a stylized repetition of acts. In other words, it is the stylization of our bodies through our everyday mundane gestures, movements, and enactments that contribute to the performance of a gendered self. Saleem has a keen understanding of this. As he shared in our conversation, by performing beauty online over and over again, Saleem makes it possible for other people, particularly men, particularly black men, to feel comfortable doing the same. As Butler writes, a constructed identity is a performative accomplishment, which the mundane social audience, including the actors themselves, come to believe and to perform in the mode of belief. In the case of Saleem, performing beauty online allows him to accomplish two of his goals. The first goal, which is to honor himself, and the second goal, which is to inspire other men to honor themselves. To Saleem, beauty isn't just for women. It is for everyone. Lastly, since I am talking about performance, I should talk a bit about the name Saleem chooses to go by online, the Method Male. Saleem's online persona, the Method Male, comes straight from the practice of method acting, According to Backstage.com, at its most simple, the method is an internal psychological technique that asserts an actor can train themselves under regimented practice to behave realistically under imaginary circumstances. As Saleam tells it, he has essentially been a method actor since he was a kid, back when he used his imagination to insert himself in the pages of beauty magazines and television programs that were not necessarily made for him. The predecessor to method acting is the system, which is an approach to acting created by the esteemed acting teacher Konstantin Stanislavski. The system is a psychophysical model to acting that revolves around Stanislavski's concept of the magic if. Actors were encouraged to consider what they would do if they were in the circumstances of the characters they were playing. Stanislavski started teaching his system approach in 1909. Lee Strasberg, the famed acting teacher, developed his own version of the system in the 1920s, which has over time become the preference of actors who utilize the method acting approach. Some practitioners of the Strasberg method include Marilyn Monroe, Daniel Day-Lewis, Hilary Swank, and the late Heath Ledger. You have just listened to a production of the Black in Real Life podcast, hosted by Anuli Akanegbu, developed by Anuli Akanegbu, scripted by Anuli Akanegbu, edited by Anuli Akanegbu, with research support by Anuli Akanegbu. The music was graciously provided by Garth, whose single Wild can be streamed on anywhere you can find music. Thank you, and remember, the people you follow online are also Black in real life.